Princess Kalyra of the Iridari Empire stood on the command deck of the interceptor Aegis, her posture a study in imperial grace. Her silver-white uniform was seamless, molded to a form that spoke of disciplined strength, not fragility. Outside the viewport, the universe offered a broken mirror of their conquest. Cygnus B, the fractured moon they occupied, hung over the glittering debris field that humans called the Shatter. It was all that remained of Earth's last great space colony, a testament to human arrogance and Iridari necessity. Kalyra's gaze was as cold and sharp as the crystalline architecture of the Iridari spire she called home. She was duty-bound, the heir to an empire that spanned 3 star systems, and her life was not her own. It belonged to the Empress, her mother, and to the continued dominance of their species. "We are approaching the comms blackout zone in Sector Gamma. Highness," Subcommander Vorel said, his voice a respectful baritone. He did not look at her. It was not proper. "Maintain course, Subcommander," Kalyra replied, her voice melodic but devoid of warmth. The intelligence report suggested organized rebel activity. "I wish to see the source of this disruption myself." Vorel permitted himself a slight frown. "It is near the human scraplands, Highness, a volatile border. General Avon advised against a personal inspection." At the mention of her betrothed, Kalyra's fingers tightened invisibly at her side. General Avon, a powerful male, the supreme commander of the Iridari fleets. He was hard, cruel, and brutally efficient. Their union, arranged since her emergence, would solidify the military caste's loyalty to the throne. It was a logical, necessary alliance. She felt nothing for him but a distant, cold respect for his utility. Love was a human indulgence, a chaotic emotion her people had evolved beyond. "The General's caution is noted," Kalyra said, ending the discussion. "Scan the sector. I want to know why those human scavengers are suddenly capable of silencing an Iridari comms relay." Her people viewed humans as primitives, fragile, emotionally volatile, and driven by chaotic impulses. They were a subspecies to be managed, contained within the crumbling ruins of their ancestors' failed ambition. They were useful for labor, sometimes, but mostly they were a nuisance. This rebellion, however, this was new, organized. The Aegis was a small, fast ship, designed for surgical strikes. It sliced through the thin atmosphere of the fractured moon, high above the rust-colored canyons that marked the no-man's zone. "Highness," Vorel said, his voice suddenly tight. "Multiple energy signatures unmarked. They are ascending fast. They look human." Kalyra moved to the tactical display. 3 crude, asymmetrical fighters, likely salvaged from the Shatter and bolted together, were powering their weapons. "Impossible," Kalyra said. "Their technology is centuries behind. They cannot achieve a weapons lock." A violent shudder proved her wrong. The ship screamed as the port shield buckled. "Shields at 50%, an ensign shouted. "They are firing plasma charges, jury-rigged." "Evasive maneuvers," Kalyra commanded, her cold demeanor cracking into pure command. She gripped a console for balance as the deck tilted. "Full power to the aft shields, return fire." The Aegis danced, its superior Iridari engines allowing it to dodge 2 of the blasts. But the human pilots were flying with a desperate, suicidal abandon. They were not trying to win a dogfight, they were trying to ground her. Another blast hit the starboard engine. The ship groaned like a dying beast. Alarms blared, bathing the pristine bridge in flashing red light. "We've lost the main drive," Vorel yelled, thrown from his station. "Brace for impact." Kalyra saw the rust-red canyon floor rushing up to meet them. She did not scream. She did not pray. She simply calculated the odds of survival and found them wanting. The universe went black. Jace was a ghost, and he liked it that way. He haunted the edges of the scraplands, a mercenary with no allegiance, surviving on salvage, cynicism, and a dwindling supply of ersatz coffee. He watched the Iridari interceptor burn through the sky from the rusted perch of his lookout, a skeletal tower that was once a human comms relay. "Damn fools," he muttered, his voice rough from disuse. He ran a scarred hand over his jaw. The scars were a map of the failed war, the one humans had lost generations ago, the one that had left him an orphan and then a soldier and finally, just this. A survivor. He watched the Iridari ship go down. It was a clean hit. The attackers were long gone, back into the debris field. He knew who they were. Rebels. Idiots. They thought they could win a war that was already over. All they were doing was kicking the hornet's nest. The Aegis crashed in the grave, an irradiated stretch of canyon that even the scavengers avoided. Jace sighed. He didn't need this. He didn't need Iridari trouble. But a ship that is new, high-grade salvage, a working power core, maybe medical supplies, enough to trade for a month's worth of water purification. He checked his radiation meter. The storm was coming in, an ion-charged squall that would make the grave lethal for the next 12 hours. If he was going, he had to go now. He grabbed his rifle, a patched-together pulse carbine, and threw his heavy radiation cloak over his shoulders. It took him 20 minutes to reach the wreckage. The Aegis was torn in half, its perfect silver hull blackened and weeping coolant. The radiation was already climbing. He moved fast, his boots crunching on the crystallized sand. He cut through a jammed bulkhead with his plasma torch. The inside was a mess. 2 Iridari officers by their uniforms were dead at their stations. He felt nothing. He moved toward the command chair, and then he saw her. She was alive, slumped against the console. Princess Kaelira. He recognized her instantly. Her face was everywhere on the Iridari data nets. The air, pure-blooded, cold as ice. The perfect alien princess. "Well, hell," Jace whispered. She was unconscious, a thin trickle of blue Iridari blood coming from her temple. Her uniform was torn. He checked her pulse. Strong. He hesitated. This was not salvage. This was a political incident. This was the kind of trouble that got men like him vaporized. He should leave her. Let the storm take her. But he looked at her face. For all her alien perfection, she just looked small. And the radiation was spiking. He wasn't a murderer. Not today. "All right, Highness," he grunted, hoisting her into his arms. She was lighter than he expected. "Let's get you out of the rain." He carried her through the howling wind, the irradiated sand stinging his face, until he reached the heavy steel door of his shelter. It was an old-world bunker, buried deep in the rock, a relic of the failed war. He sealed the door, plunging them into near-total darkness. The sound of the storm, a muted roar outside. Kaelira awoke to pain, a dull throb in her head and a sharp, fire-like sting in her side. She was disoriented. The air was wrong. It was thick, damp. It smelled of rust and oil and something organic, something mammalian. She was in darkness, lit only by a few faint green status lights on a panel she didn't recognize. She was not on her ship. "Stay still." The voice was a low growl. "Humans." She tensed, her hand instinctively going to the utility belt that was no longer there. A shadow moved, blocking the green lights. A man. He was large, outlines barely visible. "Where am I?" Her voice was a dry rasp. "You're in a bunker, in the grave." "Your ship crashed," the shadow said. "There's an ion storm outside. We're stuck here until it passes, probably 8, 10 hours. She tried to sit up, but the pain in her side made her gasp. I told you to stay still, the man said. He moved closer. You hit your head, and your suit's compromised. You've got a tear in the side. Shrapnel, maybe. Kalira's breath hitched. Her suit, compromised. She was exposed to this place. This is primitive. Do not touch me, she commanded. The royal tone strained. Relax, Highness. I'm just checking the wound. A beam of light, harsh and white, flashed from a tool in his hand. It illuminated my face. Scarred, weathered. Eyes that were tired and sharp. Humans. Before she could protest again, he was beside her. He pushed aside the torn fabric of her high-tech uniform. His hand, rough, calloused, and warm, touched the bare skin of her ribs. It was the first time a human had ever laid hands on her. The contact was not painful. It was electric, a jolt, profound and deep, shot from that single point of contact up her spine and into the base of her skull. It was not a physical shock, but something deeper. A biological cascade, a sickening, terrifying, wonderful pull that started in her gut and bloomed outward. What the hell? The man. Jace whispered. He pulled his hand back as if it was burning. Kalira looked down. The man's light was still on her, but it was no longer the source of illumination. A faint, pearlescent glow was spreading across her neck, just below her ear, pulsing in time with her frantic heart. It was a delicate, intricate pattern, like frost on a window, shining through her pale skin. She knew what it was. Every Iridari noble was taught about it. The Vehai, the mate signal, a forbidden ancient biological reaction, a quantum-level bond that signaled a perfect genetic and spiritual match. It was a myth, a legend from a more primitive time, before logic, before the Empire. And it was impossible. It could not happen with another species. It could not happen with a human. Horror, pure and undiluted, washed through her. This was a contamination. This was a violation. This was an animal, a dirty, scarred primitive with calloused hands. She scrambled backward, ignoring the blinding pain in her side, until her back hit the cold concrete wall of the bunker. The glow on her neck was already fading, but the feeling, the connection, was seared into her. The skin he had touched burned. It did not burn with injury. It ached for his touch to return. You can't be my mate, she whispered. The words were breathless, stolen by terror. Jace stared at her, his light still focused on her face. He'd seen the glow. He'd heard the whisper. He processed it through the filter of his own weary world. He let out a short, harsh laugh. My mate? He stepped back, holding up his hands, the light now pointing at the ceiling. Lady, I don't know what kind of weird Iridari light show that was, but you're delirious. Must be the radiation playing tricks with your skin tech. I was just trying to make sure you weren't bleeding out. He retreated to the other side of the small bunker, sitting on a crate. Relax, I'm not going to hurt you. Unless you give me a reason. I'm Jace. I'm the guy who pulled your royal ass out of a radiation hotspot before you fried. You're welcome. Kalira forced the coldness back, a sheet of ice over the raging fire in her blood. She pulled her torn uniform tight, shielding the skin he had touched. The glow was gone, but the bond, the pull, was thrumming inside her like a second heart. I demand you activate my locator beacon, she said, her voice shaking despite her efforts. My escort will find me. Already did, Jace said, gesturing to a piece of Iridari tech on his workbench. Ripped it from your suit while you were out. They're on their way, or they will be, as soon as the storm breaks. Until then, sit tight, Highness, and try not to glow. all over my bunker. The next 6 hours were a silent torture. Kaylira refused to speak. She refused the water he offered. She sat against the far wall, her entire being focused on the man across the room. She could feel him, not his thoughts, but his presence. It was a weight in the air, a hum in her bones. She could smell the faint, musky, human scent of him, and it made her sick with a desire she refused to name. When the storm finally subsided, the heavy thrum of an Iridari shuttle vibrated through the bunker. Jace stood up. "That's your ride." He unsealed the heavy steel door. Bright, cold light flooded the bunker. 2 Iridari royal guards burst in, their pulse rifles leveled at Jace. Behind them stood Sub-Commander Viril, his face a mask of relief. "Highness, you are alive. Stand down," Kaylira commanded, her voice thin. She rose to her feet, ignoring the pain, her royal bearing snapping back into place like armor. This, human, provided temporary shelter from the storm. Vorel and the guards looked at Jace with open contempt. A primitive. "Search him for stolen property," Vorel ordered. "No," Kaylira said too quickly. The guards paused. "He has nothing. The mission is compromised. Take me back to the spire, now." Vorel looked at her, noticing her torn uniform, her pale face. "Princess, you are unmarked. You are not contaminated." Kaylira met his gaze, her blue eyes turning to ice. The lie came easily. "I am fine. This scavenger's presence was an unfortunate necessity. He is beneath my notice." She walked past Jace without a glance. But as she moved through the doorway, every nerve in her body screamed at the increasing distance. Her skin burned. Her pulse spiked. She stepped into the shuttle, hiding the truth of the Veihai deep inside her, a toxic, burning secret. Far away, in the cold, crystalline heights of the Iridari spire, Empress Taylor received the report. She stood before a window that overlooked the entire capital city, a monument to Iridari logic and control. A medical officer bowed. "The princess's vitals are stable, Empress. She sustained minor injuries, but she refuses a full bioscan citing protocol of royal suite privacy." The Empress was still. "She is invoking privacy protocol. How interesting. Dismissed." The medic left. Her chamberlain, an ancient Iridari named Valerius, shimmered into existence from a light cloak. "The sub-commander's private report. Empress," Valerius said, his voice a whisper. He detected a residual quantum energy spike in the human's shelter, a Veihai signature, faint but unmistakable. The Empress did not turn. Her composure was absolute, but her voice, when she spoke, was as cold as the void, a Veihai, with a human, a contamination of the royal bloodline. A political catastrophe that would shatter the alliance with Avon and undermine the very foundation of their species' purity. "This cannot be," she said. It was not a question. It was an order to reality itself. The human was close to her. "Empress." "Skin contact is presumed." Empress Taylor closed her eyes. "Summon the Veikas." Valerius stiffened. "The Veikas, the royal enforcers, the cleansers." "Empress, there is a contamination in the scraplands," the Empress said, her voice flat and lethal. "And my daughter must be purified, secretly." The silence of the royal suite was absolute, a vacuum of sound designed for rest, yet Kaylira found no peace within it. For 3 nights since the crash in the grave, she had tossed upon sheets of woven nanosilk that felt like sandpaper against her heightened sensitivity. Sleep was not a refuge. It was a theater for betrayal. In the waking world, she was Princess Kaylira, the ice-cold scion of the Iridari Empire. In the dreamscape, she was something unraveling. The dream was always the same. The smell of ozone and ancient stagnant air filled her lungs. Darkness pressed in, heavy and claustrophobic. Then, a touch, a rough, calloused hand sliding over the sensitive skin of her ribcage. The sensation was not pain, but a sudden, blinding ignition of nerves that had lain dormant for her entire life. She saw the flash of a light, illuminating a scarred jaw and eyes that held the weary cynicism of 1,000 lost battles. Jace. She woke with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in the darkness. Her heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs, and her skin was flushed with a fever heat that the climate-controlled room could not temper. Kalira pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes, trying to scrub the image of the human mercenary from her mind. It was biological treason. It was madness. "Lights!" she commanded, her voice raspy. The room bathed in a soft, sterile white glow. She walked to the mirror, dread pooling in her stomach. She tilted her head, exposing the long, elegant line of her neck. There was no glow now, no visible mark of the Vehi, but the phantom sensation of it burned beneath the surface. It felt like a tether, an invisible hook sunken deep into her marrow, pulling her toward the chaotic, dirty, sprawling ruins of the scraplands. She needed answers. Logic was the Iridari way. If this was a biological anomaly, it could be excised. If it was a sickness, it could be cured. An hour later, Kalira stood in the sub-archive, a restricted vault beneath the spire where the Empire stored records deemed too archaic or dangerous for the public data stream. The air here was cold enough to see her breath. She moved through the rows of crystalline data shards until she found the section on pre-unification biology. She activated the interface with a wave of her hand. Holographic text scrolled in the air, written in the old tongue. She searched for the term Vehi. The data was sparse, treated as mythology by modern geneticists. But the records from the era of roots were clear. Vehi, the soul lock, a resonance of genetic and quantum compatibility found only in the rarest pairings. It is not a choice. It is a biological mandate. Once the connection is acknowledged by the blood, the two organisms cease to function as individuals and become a binary system. Separation causes physiological degradation. Rejection leads to madness or death. Kalira stared at the glowing glyphs. Irreversible. She read on. The bond ignores caste, creed, and species, for it is older than civilization. It seeks only the balance of strength. She deactivated the terminal with a violent swipe of her hand, plunging the archive back into darkness. Strength? There was no strength in a human scavenger. Jace was a remnant of a broken species. He was debris. The idea that her biology, refined over millennia of selective breeding, would choose him was an insult to her very existence. She would fight it. She was Iridari. She was the master of her own mind. The grand banquet hall was a cavern of glass and light, suspended high above the city clouds. The Iridari nobility gathered here to celebrate the upcoming festival of Ascension, a display of wealth and power that made the starvation in the human scraplands seem like a distant abstraction. Kalira sat at the high table, her spine rigid, her expression a mask of polite disinterest. She wore a gown of shimmering blue mesh that covered her from neck to wrist, hiding any potential betrayal of her skin. Beside her sat General Avon. He was a massive figure, broad-shouldered and imposing in his dress uniform. His skin was a shade of slate gray, darker than hers, and his eyes were black pits that seemed to absorb the light around him. He radiated a cold, predatory confidence. "You seem distant tonight." "Kalira," Avon said. His voice was deep, a rumble that vibrated through the table. He reached out, his hand covering hers. Kalara flinched. It was microscopic, a reflex she almost caught in time. But Avon felt it. His fingers tightened on hers, not enough to bruise, but enough to trap. His skin felt dead. It was smooth, cool, and utterly wrong. There was no spark, no magnetic pull, no song in her blood. It felt like touching plastic. The crash has left me fatigued, General. She lied smoothly, not pulling away. To pull away would be a weakness. My recovery is slower than anticipated. Avon studied her, his black eyes narrowing. He was a man who smelled weakness like blood in the water. I was told you were uninjured, yet you spent hours in the company of a human mongrel before the extraction team arrived. The mention of Jace made her pulse skip. She forced her heart rate to remain steady, employing a breathing technique she had learned in the nursery. He was a tool. Avon, nothing more. I used him to survive the storm. Avon brought her hand to his lips, his eyes never leaving hers. It was a gesture of possession, not affection. Tools are useful, but when they have touched something that belongs to the Empire, they must be discarded or destroyed. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning slid down Kalira's spine. He is of no consequence. To kill him would grant him importance he does not possess. Avon smiled, thin and cruel. Perhaps. But I do not like loose ends, Princess. And I smell hesitation in you. He released her hand. Kalira placed it back in her lap, resisting the urge to wipe his touch away on the silk of her dress. She looked out the panoramic window at the fractured moon below. Somewhere down there, in the filth and radiation, Jace was alive. And God help her. She wanted to be there, not here. Jace sat in the back of a dimly lit dive bar in Sector 4, a place where the air filters were 3 years past their expiration date, and the booze tasted like rocket fuel. He nursed a glass of synthetic whiskey, watching the door. He hadn't slept well. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the alien princess in his bunker. He saw the fear in her eyes, and then the strange, luminescent glow on her neck. He felt the electric shock of her skin. "You look like hell, Jace," a voice said. Jace didn't flinch. He looked up as a hooded figure slid into the booth opposite him. It was Ren, an informant for the fractured resistance movement that still tried to nip at the Iridari's heels. "Rough week," Jace grunted. "What do you have for me, Ren? I'm not in the mood for rumors." Ren leaned in, lowering his voice. "This isn't a rumor. It's a nightmare. We intercepted a localized transmission from the Spire to the Medical Corps." Ren slid a data chip across the scarred table. Jace covered it with his hand. "They're calling it Protocol Zero," Ren whispered. "Sterilization, mass scale. They're going to spike the water reclamation units in the scraplands with a genetic inhibitor. No more human births. Within 50 years, we're extinct, peaceful, quiet, and total." Jace's grip on the glass tightened until he thought it might shatter. "Why now? They already won." "Control," Ren said. "The population in the scraplands is rising. They don't want a rebellion later, so they're ending the species now. We need proof. Jace, real proof. The transmission is encrypted, but the source file, the physical order signed by the High Council, is in the administrative tower." "That's suicide," Jace said flatly. "The tower is locked down tighter than a vacuum seal." "You know the vents," Ren pressed. "You worked construction on the perimeter before the war. You're the only one who can get in and get out without tripping the bioscanners." Jace looked at the data chip. He thought of the kids he saw running through the scrap heaps, playing with rusted engine parts. He thought of the families huddled around heating coils. And he thought of Kaylira, high up in that tower. Did she know? Was she part of this? The woman who had looked so terrified when he touched her. Was she capable of signing a death warrant for an entire species? If I do this, Jace said, downing the rest of his whiskey, I want double the credits and a new identity chip. Done, Ren said. The infiltration went wrong in the worst way possible, quietly. Jace had made it past the perimeter sensors and into the ventilation network of the administrative tower. He had bypassed the laser grids and hacked the physical lock on the records room. He had the file in his hand, a heavy crystalline slate with the royal seal. He hadn't accounted for the smell. Iridari sensors in the high-security wings were not just optical or thermal, they were olfactory. They detected the specific pheromones of a human male in a sterile Iridari environment. The moment he touched the slate, the room sealed. No alarms, no sirens, just the hiss of containment doors locking and the sudden appearance of 4 royal guards in the hallway, their weapons drawn. He didn't fight. He wasn't stupid. A pulse rifle against 4 plasma lances was a short conversation ending in ash. He dropped the slate and raised his hands. They didn't take him to a cell. They didn't take him to an interrogation room. They marched him through the pristine, silent corridors of the palace, higher and higher, until they reached the private audience chambers of the royal suite. They threw him to his knees on the polished marble floor. "Stay!" the captain of the guard barked. The doors opened, and Princess Kaylira entered. She was no longer wearing the torn uniform from the crash. She was draped in silver and blue, a vision of untouchable authority. But Jace saw past the silk and the posture. He saw the tension in her jaw. He saw the way her hands were clenched at her sides. And he saw her eyes widen when she looked at him. For Kaylira, the moment she entered the room, the air changed. It became thick, heavy with a scent that hit her like a physical blow. It was the smell of rain, iron, and warm skin. It was him. Her pupils dilated instantly, blowing wide until the blue irises were nearly swallowed by black. Her heart hammered against her ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. The Vehai flared to life in her blood, screaming at her to go to him, to touch him, to claim him. She stopped 10 feet away, fighting a war within her own body to keep her feet planted. "Why was he brought here?" Kaylira asked, her voice sounding strange to her own ears, deeper, breathless. "He was caught stealing council documents, Highness," the guard captain said. "General Avon is in a strategy meeting, by protocol. Since he was captured in your personal sector, you have the right of first judgment." Jace looked up at her. The guard split his lip, likely from a rough handling, and there was a bruise forming on his cheek. The sight of his blood made Kaylira's stomach lurch, not with disgust but with a sudden violent rage at the guards who had hurt him. "Leave us," Kaylira commanded. The captain hesitated. "Highness, he is a mercenary. He is dangerous. He is bound and unarmed," Kaylira snapped, her eyes flashing. "And I am an Iridari princess. Do you doubt my ability to handle a single human? Get out." The guards bowed stiffly and retreated, the heavy doors sealing with a hiss. They were alone. Kaylira took a step back, placing a marble table between them. She needed the barrier. If she got too close, she didn't know what she would do. "You are an idiot," she hissed. "You broke into the spire? You have a death wish?" Jace shifted, wincing slightly as he adjusted his cuffed wrists. He looked at her, his gaze steady and uncomfortably direct. "I heard you missed me. Thought I'd drop by." "This is not a joke." Her voice rose, cracking with the strain. "Do you know what they will do to you? General Avon will strip your mind apart neuron by neuron to find out who sent you. Let him try. Jace said. He watched her, his eyes tracking the way her chest heaved. You look terrible, princess. Are you shaking? She was. Her hands were trembling. The scent of him was overwhelming her senses, making her dizzy. She needed him to leave. She needed him to stay. I am pardoning you, she said abruptly. She moved to the console on the wall, her fingers flying over the keys. I am entering a royal override. I am classifying your capture as a security test. You will be escorted to the lower levels and released. Jace frowned. Why? Because I do not want your death on my conscience, she lied. And because you saved me. This settles the debt. We are even. She turned to face him, her expression fierce. But you must leave the city. You must go back to the scraplands and never come near this palace again. If I see you, if I even hear your name, I will have you executed myself. Do you understand? Jace slowly stood up. The energy cuffs hummed, but he ignored them. He took a step toward the table. I don't think you want me executed, Kalyra. The use of her name, stripped of titles, sent a shiver through her. Do not presume to know what I want. I think you're scared, Jace said, taking another step. I think you felt what I felt in that bunker. I think you're feeling it right now. Stop, she warned, backing away until she hit the wall. I did some reading too, Princess, Jace said softly. About Iridari biology, about the glow. Silence, she shouted. I'm not leaving, Jace said. His voice dropped, rough and low. I think you already know I'm not going anywhere. The tension in the room snapped. Kalyra moved before she made the decision to move. It was a blur of motion. She closed the distance between them, grabbing the lapels of his jacket. She meant to shove him, to throw him against the wall, to hurt him for making her feel this out of control. Instead, she pulled him down. Her lips crashed against his. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was a collision of desperation and rage. It was teeth and breath and the taste of blood from his split lip. Jace froze for a fraction of a second, and then he surged against her. Despite his bound hands, he leaned into her, his body hard and warm against the cool silk of her dress. The sensation was blinding. The world fell away. There was only the heat of his mouth, the rough scratch of his stubble against her chin, and the roaring, triumphant song of the Vehai in her blood. It was like breathing for the first time after drowning. For 3 seconds, they were fused together. Then reality crashed back in. Kalyra shoved him backward with a cry of horror. She stumbled away, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand, her eyes wide with panic. Get out, she screamed, her voice tearing at her throat. Get out of my sight! Jace stumbled back, catching his balance. He looked at her, his chest heaving, his eyes dark and unreadable. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The kiss hung in the air between them, an undeniable, terrifying truth. The door chimed. The guards were returning for the transport. Go, she whispered, turning her back to him, hugging herself to stop the shaking. She heard the guards enter. She heard them haul him up. She heard the doors close. When silence returned, Kalyra sank to the floor. The withdrawal hit her almost instantly. It wasn't just emotional, it was violent. Her nose began to bleed, a stark crimson drip against the white marble. A wave of nausea rolled over her, followed by a fever spike that made her teeth chatter. Her body was revolting. It had tasted the bond, and now it was being starved. She curled into a ball on the cold floor of the most powerful palace in the system, shivering uncontrollably. She was the princess of the Iridari, but as the fever took her, she knew the truth. She was a prisoner to a human mercenary, and the walls of her cell were made of her own flesh and blood. The political climate in the Iridari Spire had grown toxic in the weeks since Kalira's return. Her family, guided by General Avin's harsh counsel, had seized upon the rebel attack on her interceptor as a pretext. New, punishing anti-human policies were broadcast daily. Human sectors were placed under military lockdown. Rations were cut by 30%. The official narrative was clear. The human rebels were a rising, organized threat, and their instability would be met with overwhelming force. Kalira knew it was a lie. The rebellion was fractured and desperate. This was a purge, thinly disguised as security. She moved through the palace like a ghost, her body a battlefield. The withdrawal from the Veihai bond was a physical torment. She had not slept in 4 days. A low, persistent fever thrummed under her skin, making her silks feel abrasive, and the cool air of the spire felt like a damp chill. Her nose bled at random, inconvenient intervals, forcing her to feign allergies and retreat to her chambers. She was living on nutrient solutions and sheer Iridari discipline, but she was crumbling from the inside out. The pull toward Jace was a constant physical ache, a hollow craving in her chest that demanded to be filled. The kiss in her audience chamber had been a catastrophic mistake. It had not sated the bond. It had shown it what it was missing. It had turned a spark into an inferno. She was standing on her balcony, staring down at the sprawling, light-polluted city, when General Avon entered her chambers, unannounced. "You look unwell, Princess," he said. His voice, as always, was a heavy, vibrationless sound. Kalira turned, forcing her spine straight. She had just hidden a bloodied silk square in her sleeve. "A lingering effect of the crash. General, my physicians assure me it will pass." Avon moved into the room, his bulk seeming to suck the light from the air. He stopped a few feet from her. His black eyes scanned her, clinical and cold. "It is a pity," he said, his voice casual, "that your physicians are lying to you. Or perhaps you are lying to them." Kalira's blood ran cold. "I do not understand your meaning." "No?" Avon smiled, a faint, cruel lifting of one side of his mouth. "I have been studying the old texts, the biological archives. Fascinating. The mythologies our ancestors believed." He took a step closer. "They wrote of a time when our blood was volatile, when a simple touch could ignite a biological imperative, a soul lock." He tilted his head. "They called it Veihai, a bond that once formed leads to physiological degradation if resisted. Fever, insomnia, spontaneous hemorrhaging." Kalira's face was a mask of perfect Iridari ice, but her heart had stopped. "It was said to be a myth," Avon continued, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "A genetic abnormality long since bred out of the royal lines. Imagine my surprise to find references to it in the medical logs of your ancestor, the 4th Empress, who was said to have gone mad from it. You are dabbling in fireside stories." "General," Kalira said, her voice shaking almost imperceptibly. "Am I?" He was very close now. He did not touch her, but his presence was a suffocating weight. "The Empress, your mother, wishes to accelerate our union. She believes an alliance is critical to show solidarity against the human threat. But a union is only valid if the bloodline is pure." The threat was finally unveiled, laid bare on the marble floor. "If, for example," Avon mused, "the air was contaminated, if her blood had resonated with, say, a primitive, a human, such a thing would not just be a disgrace, it would invalidate her claim, it would fracture the empire." "What do you want?" Kalira whispered, the mask cracking. "I want what is best for the Iridari. I want stability. I want you." He traced the line of her jaw with his finger. a cold, dry touch that made her skin crawl. "Marry me, Kaelira, marry me, and your secret remains ours. Your sickness will be cured by our union. The Vehi will be overridden by the legitimate bond of marriage. I will protect you. I will protect your bloodline." He was lying. The Vehi could not be overridden. He did not want to protect her. He wanted to own her. He wanted to hold this contamination over her head for the rest of their lives, making her a puppet ruler while he wielded the real power. "Refuse me," he added softly, "and I will have no choice but to present my findings to the High Council. For the good of the Empire, of course. They would have you arrested, purified. Your claim would be stripped. Your mother would be disgraced." He stepped back. "The Ascension Festival is in 2 days. We will announce our immediate union then. I am glad we had this clarifying discussion. Princess." He turned and left the room, the heavy doors sealing Kaelira into her new prison. She was no longer just sick. She was trapped. She ran to the console, her hands shaking so badly she could barely activate the screen. She brought up the palace security protocols. Avon had placed a medical watch on her chambers. She was under surveillance. She had to run. She waited until the third moon, the smallest one, had set, plunging the city into its deepest night. She pulled on a dark, hooded civilian cloak over a simple tunic and trousers. She had no credits, no weapons, only a single multi-tool. She did not use the main transport. She used a maintenance shaft hidden behind a tapestry in her chambers, a relic from her childhood games. She descended through the cold, silent guts of the spire, her body screaming in protest. The fever was rising, making her dizzy. The ache in her chest was a compass, a physical beacon pulling her southwest, toward the abandoned industrial zone, toward him. She emerged into Zone Locus, the decaying border where the pristine Iridari tech grid crumbled into the scraplands. The air here was thick with chemical fog and the smell of rust. She stumbled through the empty streets, past skeletal factories, every step in agony. She was following nothing but the hum in her blood. She found his hideout in the ruins of a hydro-processing plant. The main door was sealed. She was too weak to cut through it. She pounded on the metal, her gloved fist making a hollow, desperate sound. "Jace!" she cried out, her voice a dry rasp. "Jace!" The door slid open with a metallic groan. He stood there, framed in the dim interior light, his pulse rifle instantly leveled at her chest. He was wearing the same worn cargo pants and jacket. His face was grim. "Princess?" he said, his voice rough with disbelief. Kaelira's legs gave out. The last of her strength evaporated. She pitched forward, collapsing into the doorway. Jace dropped the rifle and caught her, his arms wrapping around her waist, pulling her from the cold. The moment his skin touched the fabric of her cloak, a jolt of profound, agonizing relief shot through her. She gasped, her body sagging against his. "Kaelira, what the hell?" He kicked the door shut, sealing them in darkness. "You're burning up." He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. She was delirious, the world spinning into a gray haze. She felt him carrying her, felt the rough fabric of his jacket against her cheek. She was laid down on something soft, a cot. "It's the bond," she managed to whisper, her teeth chattering. "The withdrawal. He knows. Avon knows." Jace stared down at her in the dim light of his workshop. Her face was pale and slick with sweat. Her lips were cracked. This was not the icy royal who had kissed him with such fury. This was a refugee. "He's right," Jace muttered. "You're sick. This isn't just pining. This is physiological." He soaked a rag in cool water and pressed it to her forehead. She cried out, a small, pained sound, and arched her back. The touch of the water was agony. "No," she panted. "Don't. It doesn't want—" "Cold." Jace frowned. He pulled the rag away. Her shivering worsened. On a hunch, he pressed his bare hand to her forehead. Kalira stopped shivering instantly. A long, shuddering sigh escaped her lips. Her entire body relaxed, sinking into the cot as the fever spike receded under his touch. Jace swore under his breath. So that's how it is. He looked at his own hand, then back at her face. "You're not sick. You're starving, and I'm—" "The antidote." He knew this place was not safe. Avon would tear the city apart looking for her. He gathered her back into his arms. "We're moving. There's a place. It's safe. Just hold on." He carried her out of the plant and into the broken lands beyond the locus. He moved for an hour, into the foothills of the high desert, until they reached a series on the planet's surface. The crystal ridges. He entered a narrow opening hidden by a curtain of petrified rock, revealing a cave. It was not a damp, cold hole. The walls were lined with massive pale blue crystals that pulsed with a faint internal light, warming the air. It was dry, clean, and defensible. He laid her down on his own bedroll. For the next 12 hours, he nursed her through the bonding fever. He didn't know what else to do. He sat beside her, his hand resting on her arm, or her forehead, or her shoulder. The simple, non-sexual contact was the only thing that kept the fever at bay, the only thing that let her rest. Kalira woke slowly. The air was warm and smelled of dust and ozone. She was not in the spire. She was not in the bunker. She was in a pale blue cavern. Jace was asleep, sitting upright against the wall, his head slumped onto his chest, but his hand was still firmly gripping her forearm. The pain was gone. The fever was broken. The obsessive, clawing need had quieted to a gentle, steady thrum. She felt whole. She sat up, and his hand slipped from her arm. He woke instantly, his hand flying to the pulse carbine at his side before his eyes focused on her. "You're lucid," he said. His voice was thick with exhaustion. "You saved me," Kalira said. It was not a royal pronouncement. It was a simple statement of fact. "I kept you from shaking apart," Jace countered, rubbing his face. "Kalira, what the hell is this Vehai?" "The archive I read said it was a soul lock. Sounds dramatic." Kalira pulled her knees to her chest. She finally told him everything. She told him about ancient biology, the irreversible nature of the bond. She told him about Avon's visit, the blackmail, the forced engagement, and the threat to her bloodline. "It's not just a feeling," she finished, her voice small. "It's body and blood. I am bonded to you, and I have doomed us both. If Avon finds us, he will kill you and imprison me. If my mother finds us, she will do the same, just to protect the throne. I'm afraid, Jace. I have never been afraid in my life, but I fear losing everything." Jace was quiet for a long time. He stood up and walked to the mouth of the cave, staring out at the fractured moon hanging in the black sky. He was a soldier, a cynic. He dealt in bullets and credits. This was something else. He was attracted to her. He had been since the bunker, but this was a level of complication he had never dreamed of. She was a princess. He was the guy who had tried to steal the plans for his species' extinction. "So," he said, not turning around, "my touch is the only thing that keeps you sane. That's convenient." "It is not a convenience, Jace. It is a damnation." He turned back. He looked at her, really looked at her. She was terrified, but she was still here. She had run to him. "You're wrong, Princess," he said, walking back to her. He sat down, closer this time. "He doesn't get to use this. He doesn't get to use you." He was conflicted. This was trouble. This was the end of his life as he knew it. But as he looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, he also felt an unfamiliar fierce surge of protectiveness. She was shivering again, the withdrawal creeping back as the distance between them grew. "Damn it," Jace muttered. He reached out, his hand hesitating for a moment in the air between them. He finally touched her face, his thumb brushing over her cheekbone. The reaction was instantaneous. A euphoric, dreamlike warmth flooded Kalira's senses. It was not the frantic energy of the kiss. It was a deep, profound sense of peace. The universe clicked into place. Jace felt it too, a jolt of warmth that traveled up his arm and settled in his chest. He saw her pupils dilate, her lips parted with a soft sigh. He leaned in, and she met him halfway. The kiss was slow, deep, and electric. It was a question and an answer. It was the sealing of a bond that both of them had been fighting. He felt her fingers tangle in his hair, pulling him closer. Then, just as the heat was building, Jace pulled back. He rested his forehead against hers, their breath mingling in the crystal-lit air. "We need to stop," he breathed. "Why?" Kalira whispered, her voice hazy. "Because if we don't, I don't think we'll be able to," he said. "And we are in a cave, running for our lives. We need to think. This is intense." Kalira nodded, taking a shaky breath. "Intense, yes." They stayed like that for a few days, hidden in the ridges, learning to be two people in a small space. The awkwardness was almost as potent as the attraction. Jace brought back scavenged ration packs. Kalira, attempting to be useful, tried to heat one with her Iridari multi-tool. She set the localized energy field too high, and the nutrient paste exploded, splattering the cave wall. Jace stared at the mess, then at her. "You have a tool that can cut through a bulkhead, and you just declared war on lunch." Kalira looked at her paste-covered hands. "This technology is not designed for primitive food applications." Jace laughed, a real rusty laugh. "Right, primitive. Here, give it to me." He showed her how to use a simple chemical flame heater. As he guided her hand, their fingers brushed. The spark was immediate, and they both pulled back, a silent agreement passing between them. She began to pick up his slang. He'd returned from a scouting run, frustrated. "The whole locus is locked down. Avon's forces are everywhere. It's a complete shit show." Kalira frowned. "A shit show? What does that mean? Is that a meteorological event like the ion storm?" Jace stopped cleaning his rifle to stare at her. "No, it's a situation that has gone spectacularly wrong." "Ah," Kalira said, nodding seriously. "Then my escape from the spire was, indeed, a shit show." The humor and forced proximity were accelerating the bond. It was becoming more than just a physical pull. That evening, they sat by the light of the crystals. Kalira was watching him, studying the scars on his face. She closed her eyes, just for a moment, letting the peace of the bond settle over her. A memory flashed behind her eyelids, sharp and clear, gray sky, the smell of burning circuits, a narrow circular shaft, coated in grime, a small hand, dirty, holding a piece of stale bread. A boy, no older than 7, huddled in the darkness, chewing the bread, his eyes wide with fear as Iridari patrols marched by beneath him. Kalira gasped, her eyes flying open. She was breathing hard. "What is it?" Jace asked, alarmed by the sudden terror on her face. The ventilation shaft, she said, her voice trembling. In Sector Gamma, by the old bakery. You were 7 years old. You stole a loaf of synth bread. You hid for 3 hours until the patrols left. Jace dropped the power cell he was cleaning. It clattered on the stone floor. He went utterly still. How? How do you know that? His voice was a dangerous whisper. I have never told anyone that. I saw it, Kalira said, her mind reeling. I was there. I was you. They stared at each other, the implication settling over them. The Vehi was not just a mate signal. It was not just an emotional link. It was a bridge. Quantum-encoded memory, Kalira breathed, the scientific term coming to her from her studies. The bond. It's transferring data. Jace, I'm seeing your childhood. The wall between them, princess and primitive, alien and human, did not just crumble. It evaporated. She didn't just feel his pull. She understood his pain. Jace, for his part, looked shaken. His entire life, his defenses, his secrets were now an open book to her. Kalira stood up. The fear she had felt in the palace was gone, replaced by a cold, clear rage. Avon thought this bond was her weakness. He thought he could use it to control her. He had no idea what he had just unleashed. She looked at Jace, who was still kneeling on the floor, stunned. He told me he would destroy me to get the throne, Kalira said, her voice hard as the crystals around them. And he is using the man I am bonded to as a pretext to annihilate your entire species. She held out her hand to him. You tried to steal the proof of Protocol Zero. I am going to help you get it. We are not running anymore. Avon and my mother are using a lie to justify a genocide. We are going to expose them. Together. Jace looked at her outstretched hand. This was no longer just his fight, or her escape. It was their war. He grasped her hand, and she pulled him to his feet. The infiltrations Jace was used to were matters of rust and shadow, of slipping through broken grates and bypassing sparking. Century-old security panels. This was something else entirely. The Iridari Archive Primus was not a building. It was a fortress of light, a seamless construct of self-repairing crystal and quantum-locked data servers, buried deep beneath the spire where the moon's bedrock met the city's foundations. This is insane, Jace whispered, his voice barely a breath in the sterile, humming corridor. They moved in perfect synchronization, two shadows hugging the wall. This place makes the administrative tower look like a public park. Patrols do not guard it, Kalira whispered back, her senses painfully sharp. The bond, now accepted, was a silent conduit between them. She could feel his anxiety as a cold prickle in her own gut, and he could feel her focused, icy calm. It is guarded by the system itself. The walls scan for unauthorized biologies. One wrong step, and the corridor will fill with null charge gas. So how do we get past it? You are with me, she said simply. The system is keyed to the royal bloodline. It expects one biosignature. As long as you remain within 3 centimeters of my body, your presence is cloaked by mine. Do not step away from me. Do not even flinch. Jace looked at her. 3 centimeters? I think I can manage that. He pressed against her back, his front molding to her, his hand resting lightly on her hip. The contact sent a jolt of warm, distracting energy through them both. Kalira's breath hitched. Focus, Jace, she murmured. I am focusing, he growled. I'm focusing on not losing my mind. They moved as one entity, a 4-legged creature of shadow and nerve. Kalyra led them through a maze of white, glowing hallways that seemed to rearrange themselves as they passed. They reached the final door, a solid, seamless slab of polished black obsidian. There was no keyhole, no console. "This is it," Kalyra said. "The inner sanctum. It only responds to the High Empress, or the air." She stepped forward, placing her palm flat against the cold, black surface. A network of pale blue light scanned her hand, then traveled up her arm, under her armor, and across her face, reading her retinal structure and the unique micro-vibrations of her pulse. "Access granted. Princess Kalyra, heir designate." A soft, synthetic voice chimed. The obsidian wall dissolved into 1,000,000 points of light, which then evaporated, revealing the archive chamber. It was a vast, circular room. The walls were lined not with slates, but with pulsing, suspended spheres of light, living data, the forbidden history of the Irreversible. "Protocol 0 is a public classification," Kalyra said, moving to the central console. "What Avon and my mother are doing, it would be classified under a deep archive designation, something to hide it from the rest of the council." She accessed the terminal. Search, genetic purity. Search, human template. Search, Project Chimera. A single blood-red sphere detached from the wall and floated toward them, hovering over the console. "Open it," Jace said. Kalyra touched the sphere. It exploded into a holographic display that filled the room. It was worse than sterilization. Jace watched, his stomach turning to ice as the files unscrolled. There were medical logs, genetic sequencing charts, and field reports. Project Chimera. It was not a purge, it was a weapons program. General Avon, with the full signed authorization of Empress Taylor, had been taking human captives for months. They were not just testing a sterilization agent. They were using the adaptable one chaotic human genome as a template, attempting to splice it with irreversible DNA. The goal was to create a new breed of warrior, resilient, fast-healing, and emotionally servile, hardwired for loyalty to the Empress. "They're monsters," Jace whispered, looking at a video log of a failed experiment, a human body convulsing as its cells rejected the irreversible graft. "They are irreversible," Kalyra said, her voice hollow. Her own mother, her entire life, her entire sense of duty, fractured and fell apart. The files showed that Protocol 0, the sterilization plan, was the failsafe. Once Avon had perfected his hybrid army, the remaining human population, the raw material, would be exterminated to cover his tracks. "We have it," Kalyra said, her voice hardening, the grief turning to a cold, sharp rage. She slotted a data slate into the console and began a high-speed data transfer. "We have the proof. Transfer complete," the console chimed. A second later, a different alarm blared, a high-pitched, invasive siren. "How?" Jace spun, raising his carbine. "I thought you were the key." "I am," Kalyra said, pulling the slate and grabbing her sidearm. "But I just copied a file designated for deletion by the Empress herself. An act of treason. The system just flagged the heir as a traitor. We have to move. Now." The obsidian door slammed shut, replaced by a latticework of red plasma bars. "The maintenance vent," Jace pointed, already firing at the wall panel Kalyra had indicated. The panel exploded, revealing a dark, narrow shaft. "This way. It leads to the lower conduits." Kalyra went first, scrambling into the darkness. Jace followed, turning to fire a covering shot down the corridor as two royal enforcers clad in black armor rounded the corner. They ran through the metallic guts of the spire, the sound of their boots echoing in the narrow space. The alarm was everywhere now, a pulsing, inescapable heartbeat. They burst out into a wide, two-level transit junction. They were halfway across a high walkway when a voice boomed from the far end. "Hold! Traitor!" 4 enforcers were at the far end. 2 more were on the level below, cutting off their escape. "Shit show," Jace grunted, pushing Kalira behind a support pillar as plasma bolts seared the air where they had been. "An accurate assessment," Kalira panted. She peeked out, firing 2 precise, calculated shots. 1 enforcer cried out and fell from the upper level. Jace laid down a spray of suppressing fire. "We need to get to that lower exit. On 3, 1, 2. He saw it, a flicker of red light from the high gantry above them. A sniper. The laser dot wasn't on him. It was fixed directly over Kalira's heart. She was coiled, ready to run. She didn't see it. 3, Jace yelled. He didn't run. He shoved her, hard, sending her sprawling to the deck behind the next pillar. Kalira heard the sound, a sharp, heavy thwack, like a pressurized tank rupturing. She heard Jace grunt, a deep, agonized sound that was torn from his lungs. She turned. He was on his knees, staring at her. A blackened, smoking hole had melted through the armor on his right shoulder, high on the chest. "Jace!" He collapsed onto his face, rage, pure and white-hot, unlike any emotion Kalira had ever known, consumed her. She rose from behind the pillar, not in a crouch, but standing tall. She did not fire her weapon. She felt the Vahai, the bond, the quantum link to Jace, and she pulled. The 3 remaining enforcers on the walkway stumbled, their vision momentarily blurring as she projected a wave of pure, agonizing, emotional static. Jace's pain, her rage. In that second of hesitation, she fired 3 times. 3 perfect shots to the unarmored joints at their necks. They dropped. She ran to Jace, dragging him behind the pillar as the guards below opened fire. "Jace, stay with me." He was unconscious, his breathing shallow. The plasma bolt had cauterized the wound, but the thermal shock was stopping his heart. He was dying. "No," she whispered. "No. I do not allow this." She pulled her Iridari multi-tool from her belt. From a hidden compartment, she took a small silver ampule, royal medical nanites. Keyed only to her bloodline, she jammed the ampule into the tool's injector port, then pressed the needle against Jace's neck. "Initialize," she commanded. The tool's screen flashed. Error. Subject DNA non-compatible. Override command. Kalira Prime. Force rekey. Authorize vital link. This was the personal cost. The nanites were not just medicine. They were extensions of her own life force. To save him, she had to link their vital signs. His death would be her death. His pain would be her pain. She hit the activation stud. Kalira screamed. The pain was blinding. It felt like fire in her veins. She felt the nanites tear through her own system, reading her DNA, then leaping into Jace's body and fighting a war against his human physiology, forcing his cells to accept them. And she felt him. The bond, already deep, shattered its remaining boundaries. It was not just memory. She felt the searing, molten pain of the plasma wound as if it were her own. She felt the fading, terrified echo of his consciousness. She felt the sudden, fierce, primal spike of loyalty as he chose to take the bullet for her. And underneath it all, a current so strong it stole her breath, a deep, aching, protective desire for her. It was so pure, so absolute, it dwarfed her own confused feelings. She collapsed over him, panting, as the feedback loop stabilized. His heart, which had been stuttering, suddenly beat strong. Thump, 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 in perfect time with her own. Jace gasped, his eyes flying open. He looked at her, his gaze sharp and clear. The pain was gone. What did you do?" he breathed. "I saved you," she whispered, her voice trembling. They found a quiet chamber, a derelict atmospheric filtration room 2 levels down. They sealed the door and collapsed in the darkness. They were safe, for a few hours at least. Jace sat against the wall, hissing in pain as he tried to move his arm. The nanites had worked, closing the wound, but the new tissue was raw and pulling tight. "I have to see it," Kaylira said. Her voice was unsteady. The emotional feedback from him was still thrumming inside her, making her dizzy. "The nanites, they can be rejected by human tissue, even with the link." "All right, Doc," he grunted. She knelt in front of him. Her hands, which had never trembled in a council meeting or a fight, were shaking now. She slowly, carefully began to unbuckle the latches on his chest armor. The scorched, melted plastoid fell away. His shirt beneath was fused to the wound. "This will hurt," she said. "Just do it." She ripped the fabric away in one quick motion. He grunted, but his eyes never left her face. The wound was a puckered pink network of new skin, angry and red at the edges. The nanites were still working, knitting muscle and nerve back together. She reached out, her fingers tracing the edge of the scar. His skin was hot. It accepted the nanites," she whispered. He caught her hand, his own rough, calloused fingers lacing through hers. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Kaylira," he said, his voice low and rough. She felt his desire, raw and unfiltered, as if it were her own. And he felt her response, the fear, the ache, the surrender. "Jace," she breathed. He pulled her toward him. The kiss was not the frantic, angry collision from the palace. It was slow. It was deep. It was a recognition. It was the end of all resistance. She helped him peel off the rest of his torn shirt. He unclasped the high collar of her armor. Her hands explored the hard, scarred landscape of his chest, and his hands traced the elegant, strong lines of her back. They came together on the cold metal floor, but there was no cold. There was only heat. It was a desperate, profound act. It was not just two bodies, it was the Vehi, the bond, the soul lock, finally completely taking charge. It was a physical and quantum sealing, a fusion that transcended species and station. It was the universe snapping into its correct alignment. After they lay tangled in the dim light of a single status panel, Kaylira was curled against his chest, her head over his heart, listening to the steady beat that now matched her own. She felt a peace so total it terrified her. She thought of her mother, of Avon, of the empire that would hunt them to the ends of the universe for this. She lifted her head, looking at his face in the shadows. She traced the old scar on his jaw. "You can't be my mate," she whispered one last time. The words were thick, broken by a tremor she could not control. It was not a denial. It was not a rejection. It was a confession, a heartbroken admission of a truth that would cost them everything. Later, when he was asleep, his body finally succumbing to the exhaustion of healing. Kaylira rose. She found a water spigot, splashing the cold, recycled water on her face. She looked at her reflection in a polished steel bulkhead. She gasped. Her neck, the Vehi, the delicate frost-like pattern that had once been a faint flickering glow was now ablaze. It was a brilliant, steady, pearlescent light, swirling from her collarbone to just beneath her ear, bright enough to cast a soft white glow on her face. It was no longer a secret. It was a beacon. She quickly pulled the high collar of her armor back on, fastening the seals, hiding the light. But she knew. It was permanent. She was marked. She turned back to Jace. "We have to go. We have to get this data to the rebels." He nodded, pushing himself to his feet, his new wound pulling but holding. He strapped on what remained of his armor. She secured the data slate. Kalira took a deep breath. Jace gave her a nod. She unsealed the heavy chamber door. The corridor was filled with light and bodies. A dozen royal enforcers, the Vekaz, stood in perfect, silent formation. Their black armor absorbed the light. Their plasma lances were all leveled directly at them. In the front stood Valerius, her mother's ancient chamberlain. He looked at Kalira, and his gaze dropped for a fraction of a second to the high, tight collar of her armor. He knew exactly what it was hiding. There was no ambush. There was no fight. They had been tracked. The vital link, the nanites. It had broadcast her location like a distress signal. "Princess Kalira," Valerius said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "By order of the Empress, you are under arrest for high treason. The human is to be contained." The cell was a cube of white light. There were no corners, no shadows, no textures. The air was filtered to a sterile perfection, scrubbed of any scent. It was a sensory deprivation chamber designed to break the mind, to isolate a prisoner in an endless, immaculate void. Kalira sat on the single white bench, her spine straight. She was no longer wearing her armor, only a simple, rough-spun white tunic. The Vehi withdrawal had returned with a vengeance. The agonizing, clawing need for Jace's proximity was a physical torment. But this time, it was different. Beneath the sickness, a cold, diamond-hard rage was forming. The bond was a two-way conduit. She could feel him, somewhere else in this fortress. He was alive, he was in pain, and he was terrified. But beneath his terror, he was furious. She drank in his rage, let it merge with her own, and used it to sharpen her mind. The seamless white wall dissolved, revealing her mother, Empress Tayla. She stood in the doorway, flanked by two Vekaz enforcers, her expression unreadable. "You have disgraced your lineage," Tayla said. There was no anger in her voice, only the cold finality of a judge. "He saved my life," Kalira said, her own voice a dry rasp. "It saved nothing. It contaminated you." The Empress stepped into the cell. The white light seemed to dim in her presence. "You have forced my hand. Daughter, General Avon is displeased. He has the loyalty of the military castes. He has seen the archive data of your ancestors' madness. He is prepared to declare the entire royal line compromised and seize control of the throne to ensure stability." Kalira said nothing. She had seen this move coming. "This will plunge the Empire into a civil war." Tayla continued. "All that we have built, the order, the logic, the purity, will burn. All because you could not control a primitive biological reflex." "What deal does he offer?" Kalira asked, cutting through the lecture. A faint flicker of surprise crossed her mother's face. "He is merciful. He offers a path to redemption. For you and for our family." The Empress began to pace the small cell. "You will appear at the Ascension ceremony, as planned. You will publicly denounce the human Jace. You will name him a rebel operative who used an unknown biological agent to cloud your mind and assault your person. You will confess your shame and beg the council for purification." Kalira's stomach twisted, but her face remained a mask. "Then," Tayla said, stopping to look down at her, "as a sign of your purification and your renewed loyalty to the state, you will accept General Avon's proposal. You will marry him. There, during the ceremony, a public political union that will bind his military power to our throne and silence all questions of your fitness." "And Jace?" Kalira whispered, the word tearing at her throat. "The human will be brought before the assembly," the Empress said coldly. "As the first act of your new union, to prove your mind is clear, you will order his public execution. He will die. The threat will be neutralized, and the Empire will be saved. Kaelira looked at the white floor. The choice was a vice. If she refused, Avon would start his coup. Jace would be killed anyway. She would be retired, a polite word for a quiet execution or a living entombment, and her mother would be deposed. The war would happen, and Avon would win. If she agreed, she would be Avon's prisoner for life, a puppet wife. But she would be alive, the throne would be stable, and Jace would still die, but he would die at her command. A tiny, cold spark of a plan ignited in the depths of her mind. She needed to be at that ceremony. She needed to be standing next to Avon. Kaelira looked up, and she broke. She let the mask crumble, let the very real, very agonizing tears of the Veihai withdrawal stream down her face. She let her shoulders heave. She played the part of the broken, terrified, shamed daughter. I will do it, she choked out, projecting the image of a girl succumbing to overwhelming pressure. I will do my duty, please, Mother, just make it stop. I want to be clean again. Empress Tayla's expression softened, just a fraction. It was not kindness. It was the satisfaction of a problem being solved. You have chosen wisely, Kaelira. The sickness will pass. Logic will return. I will send your attendants. Prepare yourself. You will save us all. The wall reformed, and Kaelira was alone again in the white void. The moment the Empress was gone, the tears stopped. The cold, precise rage returned. They had made a fatal mistake. They had read her fear and her sickness, but they had not understood the bond. They had not understood the fury it transmitted. And they had underestimated her. They had left her in this room, a high-security cell, but they had not taken her royal signet ring. It was a symbol of her station, bonded to her DNA. They assumed it was just a piece of jewelry. Kaelira twisted the heavy iridari sapphire on her finger. A micro-terminal, no larger than a grain of rice, projected a faint interface onto her palm. It was low power, shielded, and designed for emergencies. It had no power to breach the Spire's main network, but she didn't need to. She closed her eyes, shutting out the sterile white. She focused on the bond, on the living thread that connected her to Jace. He was somewhere deep below, likely in the central detention block, near the palace's core systems. She could feel his confusion, his pain, and his unyielding defiance. She used that connection. The Veihai was a quantum link, older than any technology. She piggybacked her signal onto the faint biological resonance between them, using her own DNA as the encryption key. She slipped past the firewalls like a ghost, a whisper in the machine. She found a forgotten maintenance network, a diagnostic back-channel for the atmospheric systems. From there, it was simple. She accessed the data slate she had hidden in her boot, which the guards had confiscated and stored in a digital evidence locker. She pulled the file, Project Chimera. She didn't just send it to the rebel contact, Ren. She sent it to every minor noble house Avon had bullied. She sent it to the rival military commanders who chafed under his authority. She sent it to the off-world news syndicates that the Empress could not control. And she put it on a timer, set to release in exactly 24 hours. Set to broadcast to every data slate in the Grand Ascension Hall, the moment the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Her mother wanted a show. Kaelira would give her one. The Grand Ascension Hall was a monument to Iridari power. The ceiling was a vault of living crystal, and the walls were open to the air, overlooking the entire city. Thousands of nobles, generals, and dignitaries filled the tiered seating, a sea of silver, blue, and black. Kaelira stood on the high dais, a tragic and beautiful figure. Her attendants had dressed her in the traditional white robes of an imperial bride, her silver hair intricately braided. She was a vision of purity. Beside her stood General Avon, a black monolith in his dress armor, a ceremonial plasma lance at his hip. He looked out at the crowd, his face a mask of triumph. He had won. He had secured the girl, the throne, and the future of his brutal project. "We gather today," Empress Tayla's voice boomed, amplified by the hall's acoustics, "to celebrate a new era, an era of strength, an era of unity, an era of purity." Kaylira kept her eyes down, playing the part of the penitent daughter. She could feel her heart hammering, a frantic rhythm that matched the bond. He's close. He's coming. "Today, we purge our weaknesses," the Empress declared. "We cut out the contamination that threatened our future." As if summoned by her words, the great bronze doors at the back of the hall boomed open. 4 Vekaz enforcers marched in. Between them, shackled in heavy, glowing energy cuffs, was Jace. He was not the man from the cave. He had been brutally beaten. A long, fresh cut wept human red blood over his eye. His clothes were rags, his head was bowed, and he stumbled, his legs barely supporting him. The hall gasped. This was the human. This was the primitive who had dared to touch the air. They dragged him to the center of the hall and forced him to his knees before the dais. Avon smiled, a cold, predatory baring of teeth. "Behold!" he shouted, his voice ringing with false righteousness. "Human contamination. The rebel spy who dared to use his filthy biology to assault our princess." He turned to Kaylira, his black eyes glittering with possessive pride. Princess Kaylira herself, now purified and clear of mind, has demanded his public execution as the first act of our new union. He gestured to her. "Princess, your word." This was the moment. Kaylira looked at Jace. He lifted his head, his one good eye finding hers through the blood and hair. She saw no fear, only a burning, defiant trust. The Vehai bond, which had been a low thrum of pain, exploded. It was a supernova of shared loyalty, a silent quantum scream that passed between them. She felt his despair. He felt her unbending, seismic resolve. The entire hall was watching her, waiting for her to condemn him. Kaylira's hand, hidden in the deep ceremonial folds of her white sleeve, closed around a small, cylindrical object. It was not a weapon. It was the high-yield capacitor from her multi-tool, salvaged and rigged to overload. A pulse bomb. She looked at Avon. She looked at her mother. And then she looked back at Jace. She whispered the words, a vow to herself, a final acceptance. "He's mine." She triggered the device. There was no sound. There was only light. A blinding, percussive wave of white energy erupted from her, expanding in a perfect sphere. It struck the dais, the guards, and the first 10 rows. Every electronic system within 50 meters died instantly. The crystal lights overhead exploded in a shower of sparks. The broadcast feed to the city was cut to static. The enforcers' armor seized, their plasma lances deactivating. Avon's armor locked, freezing him in place for a precious second. The amplifying voice of God system cut out, plunging the hall into a sudden, shocking silence. It was replaced by screams. And then, as Kaylira had planned, every data slate in the hall, held by every noble and general, lit up. The Project Chimera files, complete with Avon's signature and Tayla's authorization, began to play. A collective, horrified gasp swept the room as they saw the video logs, the experiments, the plan for genocide. At that exact second, explosions rocked the main entrances. Rebel agents planted in the service staff detonated their own charges. From the tiers, sympathetic nobles, Those who had lost family to Avon's political purges drew their sidearms. "Treason!" Avon roared, his armor finally rebooting. He ignited his plasma lance, his face purpled with rage, realizing the depth of her betrayal. "You traitorous bitch!" He lunged not at the rebels, but at her. Kalira did not flinch. From the other sleeve of her robe, she drew a long, thin ceremonial blade, an Iridari energy sword. She ignited it, the pale blue blade humming to life, and met his charge. The duel was a blur of black and white. Avon was a master, a brutal, powerful warrior who used his size and strength to hammer at her defenses. He was fighting to kill, to destroy her. But Kalira was not the same duelist she had been. She was not just fighting with Iridari precision. She was fighting with the Vehai. She was fighting with Jace's mind. She felt his instincts, the dirty, desperate pragmatism of 100 scrapland brawls. Avon swung his lance in a decapitating arc. A traditional Iridari response would be to parry. A block of blue against red. Kalira, guided by Jace's instincts, ducked. She dropped under the swing, the heat searing the air above her head, and slammed the reinforced hilt of her blade directly into Avon's visor. The transparasteel cracked. Avon roared, more in surprise than pain. He had never been struck by such a crude, human move. He swung again, a furious, wild lunge. He overextended, blinded by his rage, trying to simply impale her. Kalira saw the opening, a flash of memory, Jace in a bar, a man with a broken bottle. She didn't block. She didn't dodge. She dropped her own sword. As his lance thrust past her, she grabbed his outstretched, armored arm with both hands. Using his own immense forward momentum, she spun, pulling him off balance, and drove the long, ornamental dagger from her wedding robes deep into the unarmored, flexible joint beneath his arm. Avon stopped. He shuddered. His plasma lance clattered to the marble floor. He looked down at the hilt of the dagger buried in his chest, then up at her. Contaminated, he choked. The light in his black eyes died. He collapsed, his armor slamming against the dais with a sound of finality. Kalira stood over him, her white robe splattered with her enemy's blue blood. She was panting, the bond roaring with a shared savage triumph. The hall was a war zone. Rebels and royalists were exchanging plasma fire. A stray bolt, fired from the tiers below, struck her in the side. The pain was immense, a searing, familiar agony. She cried out, staggering, clutching the wound. The front of her white robe turned a dark, spreading blue, her own blood. "Kalira!" Through the smoke and chaos, a figure was running toward her. Jace. His energy cuffs were shattered, a fallen guard's plasma pistol in his hand. He had seen her fall. He fired twice, dropping an enforcer who turned to intercept him. He slid to his knees beside her, grabbing her as she collapsed. "Kalira, stay with me." His voice was frantic. He looked at the wound, his face pale with terror. The battle was lost. The loyalists were regrouping. The Empress had escaped. The palace was beginning to burn, pillars of fire raining down from the shattered ceiling. Jace looked at her pale face, then at the raging inferno. He made his choice. He scooped her into his arms, his own recently healed shoulder screaming in protest at the sudden weight. "I've got you, princess, I've got you." He did not run for the main doors, now a bottleneck of death. He ran for the high dais, for the Empress's throne. He kicked at a hidden panel in the floor, a detail he had seen in the archive files. An ancient escape route. The panel flew open, revealing a dark, spiraling staircase. Jace plunged into the darkness. Kalira, a cold, still weight in his arms. He fled through the ancient tunnels beneath the burning city, the sound of his revolution fading behind him. He ran, her life held in his hands, their bond a faint, desperate pulse against his own heart. Kalira woke to the smell of ozone and recycled air. It was not the sterile, scentless atmosphere of the spire. This air was thin, cold, and carried the metallic tang of old machinery and the faint human scent of sweat. She was in a low-gravity environment. The simple cot she lay on felt insubstantial, and the rough blanket was heavy. She opened her eyes. The room was not a pristine white cube. It was a gray hemisphere, the walls clearly salvaged from the hull of a long-dead freighter. A single flickering light panel cast a weak, yellow glow. Her side ached, a deep, pulling throb, but the searing, molten pain was gone. She was weak, but she was alive. "Easy, princess," his voice, rough, low, and closer than she expected. Jace was sitting in a metal chair beside her cot, his boots propped up on a crate. He looked like hell. He was 3 shades paler than she had ever seen him. His face was gaunt, and a new, silver scar, a companion to the ones he already owned, creased his temple. But his eyes were clear and they were fixed on her. He had not left her side. She could feel it in the bond. The Vehai was not the frantic, screaming need it had been in the cell. It was a calm, steady, warm river flowing between them, a baseline of peace. "How long?" she rasped, her throat dry. "Almost 3 weeks," he said. He reached for a bulb of water, cracked the seal, and helped her sit up. The simple movement sent a wave of dizziness through her, but his hand was steady on her back. "You lost a lot of blood. The nanites you used. They kept you alive, but they were fighting your body. The human medics here had to flush your system with Iridari blood plasma we liberated from a military outpost." "Where is here?" she asked, sipping the water. It was lukewarm and tasted of plastic. "Rebel outpost. We're on one of the lunar rings, in the Shatter, a place called Haven." He gestured to the curved wall. "It's an old mining station hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid. You're safe. We're safe." She looked at him, really looked at him. The man who had taken a plasma bolt for her, who had run with her, who had fled with her unconscious body through burning tunnels. "The palace," she said, the memory returning in a rush of fire and screams. "Avon, the files." "It worked," Jace said, a grim smile touching his lips. "It worked better than you could have imagined. You started a war, Kalira, and I think you're winning it." A new figure entered the small room. He was a thin human with nervous eyes and a data slate tucked under his arm. Jace nodded at him. "This is Ren. He's the one who picked us up in the tunnels. He's been coordinating, well, everything." Ren looked at Kalira with something approaching awe. "Highness, it's an honor. The files you released, they broke the Empire." He activated his data slate, projecting a holographic map of Cygnus B into the center of the room. It was a patchwork of red and blue. "The old royal regime is dissolved," Ren explained, his voice gaining confidence. "Your mother, Empress Taylor, fled the Spire. We believe she's at the Ethel stronghold in the outer system, trying to rally what's left of the fleet, but General Avon's death, combined with the release of the Chimera files, shattered his power base. The High Council is in chaos. Avon's loyalists, calling themselves the Purists, have declared martial law in the capital. But the minor noble houses, the ones you sent the data to, have risen up. They've allied with the human rebellion." "Allied?" Kalira said, stunned. "Iridari nobles and human rebels?" "You gave them a common enemy," Jace said, "and a common symbol." "They're calling it the Alliance," Ren said, "but it's fractured. The Purists have the heavy cruisers. We have the people and the truth. But the situation is, It's a shit show, as Jace would say. The system is on the verge of total collapse. There's no clear leadership. The purists are broadcasting propaganda that you're a contaminated traitor, a human puppet. The Alliance is hailing you as a liberator. But you've been silent. No one knew if you were alive. Kaelira looked at the map, at the warring factions, at the fires burning in her city. She had wanted to expose a lie. She had started a civil war. They need to hear from you, Princess, Ren said softly. They need to know which version is true. Kaelira looked at Jace. She saw the exhaustion in his face and the unwavering belief. He had followed her, trusted her, and bled for her. Now 1,000,000 lives, human and Irridari, depended on her next move. She swung her legs off the cot. The floor was cold. Find me a broadcast terminal. Ren, one that can't be traced. We have one, he said. But it's not a royal podium. It's a military-grade comms array. It's not elegant. Elegance is what started this, Kaelira said, her voice hard. I need function, and find me a clean tunic. I will not address my people in a medical gown. The broadcast studio was a reinforced comms chamber, little more than a closet filled with humming consoles and exposed wiring. Kaelira sat on a simple stool in front of a high-definition optical sensor. There were no lights, no scripts, no attendants. There was only the red recording light, and Jace, standing just out of frame, his hand resting on his pulse pistol. The signal went live, hijacking every network, from the purest military channels to the civilian data streams. Her face appeared on screens across the system. In the burning spire, Irridari loyalists stopped fighting to look. In the scraplands, human families huddled around flickering terminals. In the fleet, her mother watched from the bridge of her flagship, her face a mask of stone. Kaelira looked thin. She looked tired. She was not wearing a crown or royal silks, but a simple black tunic, a faint scar. The memory of her wound was visible just above the collar. I am Kaelira, of the line of Taylor, she began. Her voice was quiet, but it commanded the silence. I am not speaking to you today as a princess. I am speaking to you as a survivor. She told them everything. She spoke of the lies of Project Chimera. She spoke of her mother's complicity and Avon's thirst for a genocide, holding up the data slate with its damning evidence. For generations, we have been told that our strength comes from our purity, that our logic makes us superior. This was a lie used to justify cruelty, to consolidate power, and to dehumanize a species that was guilty of nothing but existing. She paused, gathering her strength. This was the moment. The purist regime, the one my mother now leads, tells you that I am a traitor. They tell you a human contaminated me. They tell you my mind was broken. She looked directly into the sensor, her gaze piercing, unblinking. They are right. A collective silent shock rippled through the system. Jace's hand tightened on his pistol. I was contaminated, Kaelira continued, her voice gaining a new, clear power. His courage contaminated me. When he took a plasma bolt meant for me, his loyalty infected me. When he pulled me from the fire, I was broken open by a truth our empire has suppressed for 1,000 years. Her hand moved to the high collar of her tunic, slowly, deliberately. She unfastened the seal and pulled the fabric aside. The Veihai mark blazed. The high-definition sensor captured it perfectly. It was not a scar. It was not a brand. It was a living, pearlescent, intricate pattern of light, glowing with a soft, undeniable power on the side of her neck. This is the Veihai, she said. The soul lock, our most ancient, most sacred biology. It is a guide that our ancestors revered, and that our rulers chose to redefine as a sickness. It does not see species. It does not see the station. It sees only strength. It sees only the truth. It is a bridge. A memory, sharp and cold. The bunker. The terror. Her own voice, a breathless whisper. You can't be my mate. Another memory. The floor of the filtration chamber, her body tangled with his, her voice, a heartbroken confession. You can't be my mate. She looked back at the sensor. The Veihai on her neck seemed to pulse, to glow brighter, fueled by her conviction. For my entire life, I was taught to deny this truth, but I stand before you, bonded not by law but by biology, not by politics but by choice. She did not look at Jace, but she felt him. I chose my mate, and I chose the truth. Now, you must all choose. Will we be a people defined by the walls we build, or the bridges we cross? The old way is dead. The purists offer you only ashes. I offer you a future, a shared one. Join the alliance, join us, and let us build it together. The feed cut. Kalira slumped on the stool, the adrenaline leaving her in a rush. Jace was there in an instant, his hands on her shoulders. Are you all right? She nodded, leaning her head against his chest. I am now. The speech was the tipping point. The image of her, defiant and marked by the glowing bond, became a symbol. The minor houses, once fearful, fully committed, entire regiments of the Iridari military, horrified by the Chimera files and inspired by her words, defected from the purists. The human rebellion swelled, now fighting not just against the Iridari, but with them. The Veihai mark, her contamination, became the sigil of the alliance. It was painted on the hulls of salvaged fighters and stitched onto the flags of a new, unified army. The war lasted another 6 months, but it was no longer a civil collapse. It was a revolution. Kalira and Jace led it, side by side. Weeks later, after the final battle for the Ethel stronghold, which saw her mother captured and the purist fleet surrendered, they found a moment of quiet. They were in her old chambers in the spire. Now the Alliance headquarters. The room was sparse, stripped of its former luxury. Kalira was on the floor, cross-legged, studying an ancient Iridari data slate. Jace was at the window, cleaning his pulse rifle, a habit he refused to give up. You know, she said, not looking up. According to the old texts, we did this all wrong. Oh yeah? Jace grunted, working a patch through the barrel. How's that? The Veihai bond is supposed to be delicate. It requires a formal courtship, a presentation of intent, the 7 rites of union. It involves ritual combat, a poetry exchange, and the navigation of the Krellian star charts. We seem to have skipped to the end. Jace stopped cleaning. He set the rifle down. He walked over to her, a slow, wolfish grin spreading across his face. He knelt in front of her. 7 rights, huh? He said, his voice dropping to the low, rough tone that still made her shiver. Well, as long as they all end with you naked, I'll learn anything. Kalira laughed, a real unrestrained sound of joy, and threw the data slate at him. He caught it easily, his grin widening. The final scene was not in the spire. It was not in the scraplands. It was a year later, in a new world, a moon orbiting a gas giant, bathed in the light of 2 suns. The Alliance had designated it the first of the new terraforming colonies, a joint Iridari human venture. The air was warm, and it smelled of new grass and damp soil. The first city was being built in the valley below, a seamless, elegant blend of human function and Iridari crystal architecture. Kalira and Jace stood on the balcony of their simple, shared home, watching the twin suns rise. One was a brilliant white, the other a deep, burning amber. The sky was a canvas of violet and orange. She was no longer a princess, and he was no longer a mercenary. They were leaders. They were partners. They were, finally, just two people watching a sunrise. She slipped her hand into his. His rough, scarred palm closed around hers, a familiar, comforting weight. He had learned to live with her logic and her duty, and she had learned to thrive on his instinct and his warmth. She leaned her head against his shoulder, her glowing mark hidden by her tunic, but its steady, peaceful thrum a constant presence. She thought of the bunker, of the terror and the denial. She thought of how far they had come. Her voice was soft, but the steel was still there, the playful challenge of the woman who had remade her world. Next time I say no, kiss me harder. Jace turned, his scarred face illuminated by the light of two stars, and smiled.